It's the happy idiot state, as we said in Chile. Those of us who got into it have what we call the SIC, or the Simple Idiot Club. You have to be willing to be happy before you can get into this state, and to be happy in a very simple-minded, childish way.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today we revisit a 1971 talk by Dr. John C. Lilly, physician, neuroscientist, tireless psychonaut, and absolutely one of the most audacious explorers of consciousness in the 20th century. So, who is John Lilly? First off, he was a frequent teacher at Esalen and a close friend of Esalen co-founder Dick Price. In my deep dives into the Esalen catalog, I start to see him listed as faculty as early as 1968, and he's teaching about what he called the human biocomputer, lecturing in part on isolation, solitude, and confinement experiments. You see, John Lilly is widely known in popular culture for three things. First, he invented the isolation tank, a dark and silent vessel usually filled with a saline solution that is meant to suspend the body and expose the mind to itself. He made his first one in 1954, and as legend has it, he created one at Esalen during the 1970s. Second, Lilly was convinced of the possibility of interspecies communication, notably between dolphins and homo sapiens, which led him to found a bizarre research institute in the Virgin Islands, where his research assistant Margaret Howe lived with Peter, a dolphin. Suffice to say that the results were part science fiction. And finally, Lilly was an early experimenter with ketamine from a psychedelic point of view, an interest that ultimately led to an addiction which drove him quite mad. However, during this talk from 1971, Lilly is in great form, speaking about the concept and practice of Satori, the instantaneous awakening, the shock of direct perception.
Let's start out with a very simple statement, which I'll keep repeating until you get rather bored with it, but you'll remember it and carry it away with you. Satori is a natural, simple, easy, obvious, and continuous state. Anything that brings you out of Satori, we are going to call ego programs. Anything in you that's a downer program that takes you out of the natural, simple, easy, obvious state of Satori, for purposes of discussion here, we're going to call ego or ego programs. That's not the usual definition of ego that you're acquainted with. It's not the definition that the youngsters use when they say somebody went on an ego power trip, or when the psychoanalysts talk about ego. These are different entities. In my terminology, we call these downer programs or ego programs. When you're in the natural, simple, easy, obvious state, and suddenly you're not in that state, you have to examine how you got out of the state. What brought you down? And it's your responsibility, nobody else's. If you allow somebody else to bring you down, then you are faking it. You are pretending that out there is a force that operates inside you. And this is nonsense. If you are centered and grounded, literally, it would be extremely difficult for somebody else to bring you out, short of hitting you over the head or some violent means. This is the whole basis of what I'm going to be saying today. I've already given you the talk now, and now we can go on and complicate it. Now, what do I mean by grounding and centering? I mean the same thing that we mean at Esalen or at any of the other growth centers when we say that you are in your body, you are of your body, and your body is on the planet accomplishing some sort of a job or mission. Now, you can feel this in the here and now, the instantaneous grounding and centering, by proper exercises and getting a consciousness of your whole body. Before one can successfully do a spiritual trip without tumbling in outer space and getting dizzy, one has to do the grounding and centering. If you're going to move out from this planet, be sure you're well trained on how to keep a part of you going here while you go somewhere else. And that part of you, obviously, is your physical body. In the disciplines that I've been exposed to, you really have to solve what, in the old-fashioned terminology, were called ego fixations. In the new terminology, we say these are the beginnings of the ego programs, of the downer programs. These can start anywhere in your life. When you were a child and you were threatened, the continuity of your body was threatened, or the continuity of your being was threatened, you may have made certain decisions suddenly, instantaneously, in order to survive, in what the child mind and brain conceived of as the necessity for survival. As an adult, you can go back and look at those instances, at those fixation points, and correct them. This is well known from psychoanalytic work, and it's well known also in the esoteric schools. Part of the discipline is finding these points at which your ego was created, the ego in the sense of the downers. For example, in order to take the spiritual trip, at one point I had to go back and look at a situation that occurred when I was 2.5 years old. I had just about acquired a vocabulary of a few hundred words, and my relationships with my mother were very direct, one-to-one. And I was trying to be a good boy, quote unquote, trying to carry out everything that she wanted me to carry out, and doing it in a very proud fashion, proud of my ability to carry it out. At one point, she asked me to do an impossible task. Now, if you remember, I'm 56 years old, and this is 53.5 years ago. At that time, the fashion in medicine was enemas. Anytime you showed a temperature above normal or any sort of problem, you were given an enema. I'm very glad all this has been dropped, and the enema is no longer fashionable in medical circles. Now, what is an enema? It is filling the gut from the bottom end with water, usually with a soapy solution, to the point where the subject of the experiment feels intense pain in the gut. And that little guy was asked to hold this pain, to hold this, way above his capacity to do so. Okay, he let go. At that point, his self-pride, his pride in his own accomplishments, went right down, bang. He couldn't carry out the orders of mother. At that point, a fixation took place like that. A screen was put up between me and all women, and I just didn't trust them. But I didn't know this. So I had to go back through Gestalt work, go back through other kinds of work, and find that place that I didn't know existed. I had hidden this. It was a program that was buried, but still operating. The tape loop was going round and round. You can't trust them. You know, they'll do this kind of thing to you. They'll ask you to do things that are impossible, that cause you pain, and so on. And this little old computer got this thing going, and then as it developed, insight into this process was not allowed. It was walled off and protected as one of those sacred programs known as ego fixations. Okay, when I broke through this, the breaking through was an unconscious process also. I was with the proper kind of woman for this kind of an operation, and suddenly I was overcome with shame and fear and grief all at once. And I decided to ride this and stay with it and find out what was behind this. And this is the essentials. So for 3 hours, I was in this state. And then suddenly, at the end of about 3 hours, I was suddenly taken back to 2.5 years old, and there this little guy was sitting on the john, and there was Mother in front of him, and here was me, the adult, watching this scene take place, and yet I was also in that little body as an extension of the big one. And I watched this whole thing take place as I described earlier, and suddenly I didn't trust her, and then suddenly I got inside her head and realized, as the adult, it was not her fault. She was ignorant. She was following a basic cultural program. She was following the medical dogma of the day. She wasn't directing this at you, this little guy. And suddenly I forgave her, trusted her, and the whole thing was filed away as, you know, an interesting historical episode without any charge on it anymore. Okay, now I share this with you because it's one of the illustrations of what I mean by ego and what brings you out of Satori. You can be picked up by any one of these things that you've stored away and that's a tape loop operating below your levels of awareness that you haven't investigated and you don't even know it's there. Now, lots of times there are some of these that are just below levels of awareness. You can dive into them and pull them out. But if you have a friend who's aware of this kind of thing, it's a lot easier for that friend to go in there and bird dog on your ego than it is for you to. You know, they can be kind of ruthless at times if you allow them to do so. But you should be very happy when they find ego, when you do get upset by something they say, because that is one of your programs in you that's keeping you out of the blissful states of Satori, blissful and other kinds of Satori, which we'll discuss. So you can have a group, say, that does ego reduction on one another. But ego reduction in this sense is not knocking you down at all. It's finding out where your sensitivities lie and allowing you to get rid of them. Okay, now let's get to Satori itself. What do I mean by this term? Well, in the school in Chile, where I spent 7 months working with a group of about 53 Americans, Satori is given various levels, assigned various levels. And the Gurdjieffian vibration level numbers are used to designate these levels. This is an arbitrary scale going by factors of 2. And it's an inverse scale. The highest Satori has the smallest number. The lowest Satori has the highest number. So if you wish to think of it this way, these vibration levels are wavelengths of sound in centimeters in air. So at the highest level of Satori is the shortest wavelength or the highest frequency. So Satori 3 would be 3 centimeter wavelength of sound in air, and hence about 30,000 cycles per second. 30,000 cycles per second, if you have enough energy in the sound source, can be heard, rather felt. And it's a very peculiar feeling. It's, in me, it's in the back of my head, down near the base of the spine, and going on up into the top of my head. Okay, the next level of Satori, down from the one represented by 3, is 6, factor of 2, and that would be about 10,000 cycles per second, which is at the upper edge of my frequency discrimination curve. I'm still sensitive to changes in frequency here, and it's the upper end of high-fidelity music and high-fidelity speech, and so on down by factors of 2. So we'll leave that analog. That's only one analog for the vibration levels of Gurdjieff, and go on to the description of the Satoris themselves. Okay, let's talk about vibration level 48. 48 is where you're in neutral. You are neither on a positive emotional kick, a positive trip, nor are you on a negative one. Your computer is operating at its own level of energy, but it's a neutral energy, neither positive nor negative. We're operating here theoretically in 48, unless there's somebody here that's hyper enthusiastic about what I'm saying, or there's somebody here that's totally against what I'm saying. If you're in either of those states, you're not in 48. If you're hyper enthusiastic, you're over on the ecstasy positive side, and if you dislike what I'm saying, you're over on the negative side. You're below 48. In other words, 48 we will call the neutral 0. So let's establish a scale with 48 right in the middle, and we can go either way from it. We can go positive or negative. All right, let's talk about the positive first, and then we'll come back to the negative. We take half of 48, so we have 24. That's the first level of Satori. You've moved out of neutral into a positive state. All right, what is 24? 24 I call a professional Satori. This is the level at which your computer is using stored programs which are facilitated, which are known to you, and which have been stored in the past. Some of them are working below levels of awareness, some you are aware of, but it's going very smoothly. You do not have to have any new programs inserted. The reprogramming is done in 48, not in 24. 24 is where you're doing what you know how to do and doing it best, so that you are enjoying it and you lose yourself in that particular activity. So a carpenter, an artist, a psychotherapist, a businessman, a politician, doing what they know best. And it makes no difference what this is. They are in Satori 24. Now, this is the planet-side trip. You are tied firmly to this planet and its affairs. You are firmly tied to your body. You are centered and grounded and happy. Now 12. We're dividing 24 by 2 again, so we move now to the next level of Satori. 12 is best understood if you realize, in your own experience, that the times you have been blissful, this is Samadhi Ananda in the yoga tradition, and it is achievable in ordinary everyday life through sexual activities with a proper partner. It's achievable by other means, by disciplined means in the various esoteric schools, and it's also that state which is LSD leads to when it's a good trip. LSD is a free ride into Satori 12. Now, I don't recommend this route, but it's there. It exists. And I'm trying to give you all the information, irrespective of how it's judged. Now, 12, what are some of the subjective feelings that you have or can have in 12? In my experience, 12 achieved through discipline, straight discipline, without sex, without chemical aids, is a state which has vast areas of experience. It's an incredible territory. In the modern terminology, this is a very big set of spaces. I'll describe the ones that I know and some of the ones I've heard about that other people know. In 12, my body becomes transparent to energy. Now, what do I mean by energy? It's a kind of energy, or its whole set of energies, which are not yet in our present consensus science. We have apparently means of detection of these energies in special states of our biocomputer, for which we have not yet devised instrumental means of detection. So it can't be in our physical science yet. It can't be objectified, removed from a brain. These have to be detected through the agency of our own heads, as it were, in our own bodies. Now, these energies flow within the body and between bodies. They also flow between the planet and us and between the galaxy and us. They flow between us and the sun. Now, in my particular case, I've felt it and seen it and known it for the sun, for the planet, and for other people. And I won't go beyond that. I've felt that there is a cosmic flow that's bigger than this, but that's much harder to detect because it's a more uniform kind of field, and the detection is less easy than these more powerful sources. For example, right now in this room, there is a tremendous flow of this kind of energy going on between me and each one of you and between you. And if one were to be able to go into 12 and still talk, that's one of the characteristics of 12, is that you can only say kind of idiotic, happy things. It's the happy idiot state, as we said in Chile. Those of us who got into it decided we would have what we called the SIC, or the Simple Idiot Club. You have to be willing to be happy before you can get into this state, and to be happy in a very simple-minded, childish way. And one of our cultural characteristics, one of our cultural ego programs to keep you out of 12 is that you just don't sit around with a happy grin on your face looking like you belong to an institution. So that 12 is a difficult cultural thing for Americans above, say, the age of 25. Below that, it seems to be a lot easier. And the younger you are, the easier it seems to be to get into 12. It seems to be some sort of a natural state for children. And as you grow older and you accumulate more of these anti-12 programs, which we call ego, it's a more difficult thing to achieve. Happy Idiot Country and the simple idiots in Happy Idiot Country in the United States, then, are mostly under 25. If you want to gamble on an age level above that, okay, but don't do it in public, please. The police and various other people don't like it somehow. Unless you have your own kind of protected environment, stay in 24. The states above 12 are further out. But it's a good idea to get into 24, decide what you're going to do, and then use some of your own accesses to 12, and do this slowly. And then if you know how to do it, you can go to 6 and then finally to 3. 3 seems to be the highest level to which humans can go and still come back to their bodies. If you go any higher than that, you apparently don't get back. So they have to cart off the body, and that's that. There are levels, intermediate levels, but I don't want to deal with those at this point. It's a very complicated subject. I'm just giving you points on a big scale, which is convenient for purposes of discussion. But it does not specify totally how to get to these states, nor does it tell you what they are. It's only a way of lining up the data, of making a map. So don't mistake the map for the territory. It is not the territory. Okay, continue with 12, Ananda, if you want to call it that. When you are in 12, you want to share it. This is a prime kind of feeling. You have no ego, there's nothing bringing you down, and you want to share it with everybody that is in your particular bailiwick. If you're lucky, you will find somebody who sees you in this state, feels the energy, and comes up with you. If you're not lucky, you'll find somebody that looks at you as if you were insane, says you're psychotic and wants to lock you up. Okay. But if you allow that to enter, then you're going to come down. Now, somebody once said that the only reason for coming down from 12 is to help other people get up to 12. And that's the feeling you have in 12, is it's a place to share, and it's an energy flow that you really like and really want to be with and have everybody else there. Okay, that's Satori 12. You're still in your body, you're still on the planet-side trip, and you're still very much related to everybody else as a human being here. 6, the next level, you have become a point of consciousness. You have a center of your being, of your love. You've accumulated this love in 12, and now you've compressed it down to a point. It no longer needs the body, the whole body anymore, and it's a single point. It, as you see it in 6, and as you see others in 6, you'll see that they are point sources of warmth, of love, of consciousness, of information, and that they're mobile. In 6, you can move your point source through your body anywhere. You can move it outside the body anywhere. You can move it inside somebody else's head or into their body. Or you can take trips, it used to be called astral travel. But you don't need the umbilicus, the umbilical cord that is described in the astral travel thing, because you're not carrying that excess baggage program known as the astral body. The astral body, in the old terminology, people felt a lot safer if they could carry a reproduction of this body. Well, I found that this is an excess program. You don't need it. If you're willing to compress yourself down, as it were, and keep it efficient, the point source is much easier to operate with. And I think those of you who have had out-of-body experiences will pay attention to this. You'll find that if you've carried a body with you, that it's kind of an internal survival need. You don't quite feel safe out of your body without a body. So you reproduce this body, and it's a fake program, if you wish. It is a program in which you're constructing a body which can go through walls and all of the usual things that you hear of in spiritualistic kinds of contexts. But this isn't needed. All right, in 6, you have this same desire to share, the same love, the same divine objective love, as it's called in the school. And I have a little thing for you to remember about divine objective love in this context. Divine objective love is ruthless. It's going to love whether you like it or not. So if you have somebody that's in 12 or 6 and you're in their neighborhood, whether you like it or not, they're going to try to pull you up. And you'll feel this. And if need be, they will bird dog on the last bit of ego that you have and, kind of point out what's keeping you from going up, because they can see it. They can look right into you and see what's keeping you from coming up. And so they're likely to name it in order to have you come up and share this natural state. This can lead to trouble or it can lead to fun, either way. Okay, in 6 you can also, as a mobile point, you can go anywhere in the cosmos that you can conceive of. Your navigating and piloting in these regions are limited by your knowledge of these regions. As it were, you are not allowed to go places you don't know about. So it's very hard to get into places where you're in a totally unknown territory. It takes a lot of courage to do a big jump in 6 and land in the middle of somebody else's territory that you don't know anything about. If you do this, you can be precipitated into -6 very rapidly. And -6 is where it's no longer any fun, it's kind of a hell in which you've landed. And this is one of the cautions about these trips. There are minus places, -12, -6, and -3, which are places that some people have to go to in order to learn that they exist, and they want to stay out of them. There are some of us that are brought up in the Judeo-Christian background and also the Calvinistic background, in which you need a hell in order to have a heaven. Now, this is also excess baggage. But, if you have those ego programs, you have them, so you might as well go into it. Find out where the fixations on those started and get rid of them. so that you can go in 48 and go positive without bothering to do what we call the trampoline effect, which is to go negative first so you can bounce up. One of the cautions about entering the higher Satoris, as I said before, is that you may slip off the positive. If you have some ego that you're taking with you, the ego will bring you right back into a negative state very fast and very precipitously. This is the upside down peak experience. Instead of going like this, you go like this. Now, people have asked, is this like Maslow's peak experience? Well, I don't like the term peak experience because a peak implies that you go up to a very high peak and then you come down. You don't have to do that. You can go up and have a mesa and stay there, and then come down and go up again. So you can have an inverted peak if you wish, have a valley. So we can talk about if the natural state is to be high, then the inverse of this is a negative peak. So I would prefer to give you the concept of the negative peak as opposed to the Maslow positive peak. The negative peak is where you're coming down to bring somebody else up. Okay, we have 6. You are a point that can move. You can get into very peculiar spaces. Any space that you can conceive of, you can go to. So all of the trips that you've read about in regard to St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, some of the acid head trips, and so on, are of this nature. Some of them are 12, some are 6, and then some of the very far out places with far out experiences. Now, one of the characteristics of tripping on 6 is that you will project your current knowledge onto the space that you're in. And I want to caution you about that. If you, for instance, come across an entity, non-human, on 6, and you have to have a human form on that entity, you'll put it there. You will have direct kind of telepathic communication with the entity, and it'll almost be as if it's your own mind accumulating new information with a projection out there. And you'll never be able to separate the projection from an entity that is in an external reality. There's no way yet that I know of that you can validate these experiences, aside from getting somebody else to go to the same place at the same time and come back with the same information. That's the only route that I know of, and that's well worth exploring. It hasn't been done yet in the detail and with the care that I'd like to see somebody put into it. But it'll come. As more and more people get into this, and our language improves, and our descriptive abilities and our concepts are improved and expanded, we'll be able to get consensus in these realities as well as we do on this planet reality, planet-side reality. That's an article of faith. You can take it or leave it. But that's where I am at the present time. Okay, now let's go to Satori 3, as if you can. Satori 3, the point, in my experience, becomes either a spherical surface or a solid, so that you are simultaneously aware over a huge, vast, extended surface, which can, say, enclose our galaxy, or you are aware throughout the solid known as our galaxy. You are aware of all the empty spaces and the material suns and the various aspects of the galaxy simultaneously. And this is a very hard experience to describe in words because our words are not designed for this yet. They will be as time goes on. So I use the geometrical transform here. Imagine your point of self becoming a surface. And you are instantaneously and simultaneously conscious of everything going on inside that surface. Now, if you can do this exercise and imagine this situation, then you're well on your way towards this kind of trip. But until you have this kind of map, I wouldn't advise doing it because you may end up in other places. The negative of this trip, you may end up, for example, as scintillating points, disconnected points of consciousness in a chaotic, noisy universe. Well, you can convert that, if you know that that can be converted, you can convert that to the spherical surface or to the solid and get your feet back on the ground, as it were. Okay, 3, as I've experienced it, is a spherical surface. Now, how do you get back from this cosmic self spread out down to this planet? Well, we'll go through a description of what happens on 3. 3, for me, as opposed to some other people, is an extremely high energy place. Creation is taking place at a fantastic rate, and I became at one with the creators, whoever they are. The experience was that there were hundreds of billions of creators, that I was not alone, that I was intertwined with the others and spread out over this surface. Okay, on one side of the surface is the void, and out of the void, energy is being created through you, through oneself. And then one is converting that energy into matter in the old mc squared equals E kind of basis. Then the matter is being assembled into living units, and the living units are becoming conscious and realizing more and more of the kind of creator activity that we're talking about. Now, getting back from this spherical surface, you have the instant that you decide, or somebody else decides, nobody seems to know who decides this, that you're going back wherever you came from, you suddenly realize that there are literally billions of possibilities, many, many pathways, and you can go down any group of these. So you start down. First you start down, say, 1 billion, then you're down to 1 million, then you're down to 100,000, then you're down to, finally you're down to 2, one of which, say, is this body and something else. And plunk, you're back in this body. You think. You look back up at that dendritic tree of all those choices that were made, and suddenly you realize something, that it wasn't you, that you are the vehicle, that I, that's talking here, saying I, is an aspect of this biocomputer in this body. It's not the character that went on that trip. The character that went on that trip, which in the school is called your essence, is the proper pilot for the vehicle. It's the one that you get closer and closer to as you go into Satori. And as you get further and further away from the ego programs, you get closer to the essence programs. Now, as you get close to the essence programs, you start going up on the various Satori levels. When you hit the level 3, you are identified with your essence. Your self, metaprogrammer, and your computer and your essence are coextensive, if you wish. Then you make the discovery, okay, that essence is hooked into all other essences. All the other essences in this room, all the other essences in the universe. Not necessarily human. And they are all equally good at being pilots of various kinds of vehicles. So all they have to do is get a hold of a vehicle, look in the glove compartment, and there are all the directions for running it. And there are all the directions for the way that vehicle thinks, feels, and the ego programs are available. Now, what is the essence going to do with this? One of the essence's problems is to kind of help that self, that self-metaprogrammer, to get rid of the ego programs, or at least to file them properly and not put so much energy into them, so that the self-metaprogrammer can get closer to the essence.
Where in the scale would he put someone in a depression? I suppose it would vary on the degree of depression, the depth of depression.
Right. If we take, say, 48, which is your neutral computer level, and now we go to 96, twice 48. 96 is where a person is when they've drunk too much alcohol. For example, it's the first level of depression. It's the first level of self-castigation. It's the first level of paranoid fear. It's the first level of all the negative kinds of things. You can be in intense physical pain, for example, and hit 96, though you don't have to. You can separate off from physical pain and maintain, say, 48 or 24, as is well known. 96 is a minus 24. In other words, you can still carry on your job, but it's no fun. This is a burden. It's painful. You just don't like it, and so on. You're still using your built-in programs, your acquired programs, in your activity, and you're still able to function on the planet-side trip in minus 24, but you don't really like it. Okay, now minus 12. This is the opposite of that blissful state that we were talking about. You're an idiot here, but you're an idiot that's in pain, that's in fear, that's, in these other states. And I think this is probably the level at which a lot of the so-called psychotics exist in. At least the ones that are not having a groovy trip and trying to hide it. There are some people locked up in mental institutions, for example, or used to be locked up, who are apparently in some of the higher Satoris. And anytime anybody tries to pull them down, they show a violent kind of reaction to this and refuse to come down, and hence are not available for ordinary communication. But let's go on with the negative. Minus 48, which should be 192. No, wait a minute. Minus 12, I should say. You are still transparent to these energies, but they're very negative. They're painful things that are happening to you. There's maybe, say, a paranoid aspect to this energy coming from other people. You may fear their influence upon you. You may think that they are programming you in evil ways, for example. You can put the negative construction on the phenomena, but the phenomena are the same. So you could flip from, say, minus 12 to plus 12 once you realize what's going on. And a lot of the kids know this. They know how to convert a bummer into a good trip by sort of exactly that. With the help of a friend, they can move it across. But if you come on somebody, for instance, having a bum trip, say on acid, in a hospital, you can program them into these minus places very rapidly by pulling the usual psychiatric kinds of procedures on them. It's much better to get some youngster who knows what's going on to come in there and try and get them to go positive. And this kind of thing is being done in Los Angeles, where the kids themselves come into the clinics and work with the kids that are on bummers. I think this is a much better system. It's a new one, and it's working. Okay, so minus 12 is very much like plus 12, except that it's a bummer. Minus 6 is just like plus 6, except it's not fun. You are the victim. Somebody's holding you in that fixed central place. There's outside pressure for you to stay there. You're not a free agent. And you're being forced through programs that you don't want to go through. Your center is being taken and moved. Well, now, if you study this situation very carefully, this is also happening in plus 6. There's a lot of sort of passive acceptance of what's going on in 6. You're not doing an active programming in 6 at all, in most cases. You are allowing. You are giving in to what's happening. Well, now this can have a negative twist, and you can go to minus 6 very rapidly, especially if you're fighting against somebody else programming you. That outside programmer can be interpreted as negative. Now, minus 3 is a particularly interesting place. At one time, I spent 3 hours there, and I never want to go back. In minus 3, I became a little program in a cosmic computer not doing anything on my own and having everything done to me, totally in a negative way. And the main thing in my particular personality that was hellish about it was that nothing had any meaning. There was no meaning to any of this. There was this random universe, this huge computer that happened by accident. In other words, this is the basic assumptions of some of our modern science, that there was no God, there were no entities greater than human, except evil ones, and that the devil was programming this computer, as it were, and yet there was no devil. There wasn't anybody that was that held together. So information, meaningless information, was coming into me, being processed and passed on to others. And all of it was in a state of panic, of total and utter panic for the 3 hours. It's a wonder that my body survived this, but, you know, it was a very good experience because it taught me that I never wanted to go there again. Somebody came along and found a little bit of my ego and tweaked it just now. This man over here with the glasses. He said that a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine actually, says I have a very rich fantasy life, and that's how he explains everything that I say. Well, that fits in beautifully with where I was, say, 5 years ago, when the word fantasy had a lot of meaning for me. In my workshops, I've labeled fantasy as a dirty word. I've labeled imagination as a dirty word, and make people work on what they really mean when they say that. You're lazy if you use the word fantasy. You're lazy if you use the word imagination. And you are getting tripped up by highly sophisticated ego programs. You are not investigating what's going on when you use those words. So a description of me as having a very rich fantasy life means absolutely nothing until I get the specifications of what that person's belief structure is, where he is, what he's doing, and what his experience is in these areas. If you're tied to the planet-side trip, if you're tied to consensus science, groovy. This is great. If you're dealing with far-out physical theory or biochemical theory, great. These are pathways to the same areas. It just means that you're more patient and taking longer than the people who want to jump through that and go to places. Now, validation, as I said, is a difficult business here. But if you pay close attention to validation in consensus science, say in biochemistry, you are assuming that the guy at the other end of a set of facts that you've read about is, first of all, has found something that has a basic reality under it, and you can test this in your own laboratory. And similarly, in these areas, until you've had direct personal experience in the laboratory of your own mind, your opinion is not worth very much. The expertise here is just as great as it is in any of the sciences. And I've learned this the hard way. I used to be a hardcore type physical scientist, biologist, and this kind of thing, not looking at these areas and saying that those are a bunch of guys who are imagining things, they have projective programs and all the rest of this, and using the usual downers. Until I came across my direct personal experiences myself, and then found that there were people, when I went to look for them, who could confirm, yes, I've been there too, and if you look over here in this little area, you'll see this, and if you look over there, you'll see that. Now, the physical scientist may say all we are doing is programming one another, and that this is an imaginary kind of thing. Now, what does he mean by this? He means that there is no reality here other than what's going on inside our heads. And that is a basic assumption of modern science, that there are no means of communication other than the obvious physical ones that we've already specified. I feel this is nonsense, and that it is a prejudiced and narrow viewpoint and that there are demonstrations, if you're willing to undertake them, of these other realities. Aside from that, I won't fight. I'll just enjoy it.
Do you feel that these other modes of communication that you've been talking about are in fact completely non-physical?
I don't know what you mean by non-physical. I think they are beyond our present physical science, and that eventually they may turn out to be classifiable in our physical science. Yeah. I don't believe in anything that's super physical or any of these other concepts. I think that's nonsense. You don't need these concepts. They're redundant.
How are some of the states of Satori related to the states that can be achieved in transcendental meditation?
I don't see that they're any different. There are many, many routes. He talked about how are the states of Satori different from what you achieve with transcendental meditation. There is no difference. I don't know. I'm not acquainted with the descriptions in this area. The descriptions in Patanjali, 300 BC, are given in the Science of Yoga by I.K. Taimni, Taimni. And he has a table in there of samadhi levels. And you can just go right down and mark off the Satori levels right on that table. There's perfect agreement between the levels. So that it isn't as if these hypothetical frameworks that we're talking about were strange to any one person in this area. I think there is agreement. There's an amazing amount of agreement as to the kinds of maps that you should have if you're going to get into this area.
Can I ask a question on that? Is there any system that conceives, or is there any conceptual concepts that don't involve levels? Is there any way of conceiving of these experiences in a way that doesn't have the higher-lower concept to it?
Well, as I keep saying, in outer space, there is no up or down. It's only sidewise. So the concept of higher and lower Satoris, of course, is only a crutch. Eventually, what happens, insofar as I can see, is that you can be simultaneously present on all of these levels. In other words, you can be operating in 48, 24, 12, 6, and 3 as a total entity. Now, this is a much more difficult concept to get than a trip at any one of these levels. And the simultaneity thing, until you've experienced it, is a very difficult one. In other words, staying grounded at the same time going out to 3, for instance, and 6, and 12, is a difficult thing to get across in words. But it is a real experience.
The individual who has freedom from all ego conflict, who doesn't carry any charged up areas from unfinished business in the past, where does he kind of function on the scale?
He asks if a person who has no ego programs, no downers, as it were, where he is. That's where he is. I don't know. This is a hypothetical person. If he has no ego programs, then he's a navigator and piloter of these areas, automatically.
Hypothetically, you would go down to 3 or 0, yes?
Well, he'd have freedom to go where he wanted to go. I've met a lot of people who have this freedom, and the only thing that keeps them out of these places is the stigma attached to them by our society. And I've helped several people who were very talented in this region to realize that this was not psychosis, this was not mental illness, but a talent. It's just quite the opposite. And we're likely to get taken in by their programs for us. Now, if we can sort of get calmed down about this and realize that this is not dangerous, eventually, with the proper training, with the proper education, this is maybe a preferable way of living.
At 3, is there this caring and love, or are you out of that?
In 3, is there caring and love, or are you out of that? You are so far into it that that's the only reality.
But it isn't just
You are not you in the old sense anymore. You have dropped everything that is the planet-side trip. You are now something else that is creating. And it's on such a vast scale and with so much energy coming through you that there isn't time to really consider. But, as I said earlier, divine objective love is absolutely ruthless. And on 3, it is completely ruthless. If you pay any attention on 3 to whether this is 3 or not, or get any of these critical things going, you're out of 3. You can't stay there. It's bang like that. You can't stand the energy or the walking that fine line between coming out and staying in.
Is 6 the stage where a person is possessed?
Possession. She's asking about possession. You mean somebody taking over the body?
Or something taking over?
Something taking over the body. No, that's probably down in 12 or 24. Well, at one point I called some of the characters that you can meet on 6 cognitional carnivores. That was back in 64, and I was working with isolation. You can meet up with entities there that you feel are going to eat your self, that are going to absorb you. Well, this turns out to be nonsense. This is a projection of you onto that system. And as it were, you carry the evil in you. Evil is what you project. Can be in 12, can be in 6. Can be anywhere.
You said you didn't approve of using LSD to reach level 12. I know you've done considerable study on LSD. Did you sort of go into that?
Well, the work that I did was back in 64 to 66. As soon as the word came out that this kind of work was illegal, we sent all our LSD back to Sandoz and quit. And during that 2 years, I went through the experiences that I've been describing. And in an isolation tank, in the dark, and in the quiet, so we could free up my body from the necessities of the stimulation on the planet-side trip. One way of doing this, of course, is to get in the dark, get into the silence, and float so that you equalize gravity and have an isothermal bath that you're in, so you equalize temperature differences. So all of the things that usually you depend upon to realize your external boundary with respect to reality, you've ironed out. You've reduced to as close to zero as you can. This allows, then, the signals from other kinds of realities or the internal programming that you have available to take over. So you can do simulations in the modern computer sense, setting up models and all of the activities that an isolated computer can do. Now, there are several explanations of the resulting phenomena, if you're interested in that, and of these various levels of Satori that we're talking about. It may be that we go nowhere, that we stay in the body, stay in the computer, and that all we're doing is opening up communication channels with civilizations that are way, way ahead of us. Now, if we assume that there are energies which we can detect by means of our brains and special organs in our brains which we can't yet describe, and if we can then say, okay, in 1,000 years or 100 years, whatever it is, we will have instrumental aids which will allow us to do this directly, without all this work, without chemistry, we'll say, then we have a framework in which we can operate. We can say, okay, we're exploring the unknown, and frankly, this is what we're doing. So what we want to do is attenuate all the signals from the consensus reality, the body trips, and so on, to the lowest possible level, and so that we can then pay attention to the signals coming from these other places, from other people, from other species on this planet, from the other characters in the cosmos, whatever it is. And that's why I say you're limited by your concepts as to what you can do here. You can receive information which is totally meaningless to you because it's in dimensions that you haven't yet experienced. And the whole business of moving into these places and accepting them and then exploring them is a very difficult thing without the proper cognitional and computational equipment.
If you you like find yourself in -6, say, or -3, and you don't have the guide there or whatever do you have a way of yourself of coming out of this?
Well, he asks if you find yourself in -3 or -6, are there ways of getting out of it without a guide? I'd say you better have a guide. It's, somebody who's really tuned in on this. I got into these places alone the first time, and it's, I wouldn't advise the way I did it. It's kind of scary.
Well, you said like before when you were talking about 6 that you could be a +6 and all of a sudden find yourself in sort of a hell or an unknown territory.
-6.
Right.
Or just an unknown place, okay.
You go from +6 to -6 like that, right?
Right.
You said that. So if all of a sudden you find yourself in a state, -6, and then, you don't have a guide or whatever, you're not in an institution or whatever, and is there a way of coming out of, or,
Well, if you are capable of it, and you aren't completely shattered by being in this negative place, yes, you, by experience of having been there and you've come out, you can do it again. If you have one experience with a guide, then you can do it again. But you have to store it. The requirement is that you stay conscious, totally conscious all the time of what's happening. And the Sufis, for example, say you must reach levels of awareness, levels of consciousness. The awake man is one that goes through the negative experiences, stores it all in a conscious way, and remembers it. If you don't do that, if you cop out at any point and go unconscious and can't remember, you can't do this.
It seems that in encounter, for instance, it would be very easy for someone to get to a place like -6 or -3. Is it equally easy to move up and can encounter, for instance, serve as a set of programs?
If the encounter group, the question is, with encounter groups, can you move from a minus to a plus state? It all depends on the basic assumptions of the encounter group. If the basic assumptions are, for example, that Satori is natural, simple, easy, obvious, and continuous, and that ego is that which keeps you out of Satori or brings you down, fine. Then you have the proper kind of encounter group to go high. But if the basic assumptions of the encounter group are, you have hidden rage in you and you must bring it out to the group, for example, with nothing beyond that, no. You can get into very negative places with that.
In other words,
You get past that by all of the group agreeing that Satori is a natural thing and that your aim is to get there. And working on one another's ego, in other words, that which keeps each one of you out. It's a whole different basis for an encounter group than the previous one that we've been using.
Can you see all the trends now towards changing states and things that like encounter groups, hypnotism, anything that sort of is tended towards raising your state. In other words, becoming sort of ego programs or consensus things, maybe in a sort of a sense becoming ritualized like the religion things we were just talking about.
Can you state this more simply? Can you ask the question more simply?
Just the trendy aspects of a lot of new things cropping up, new therapies, all these different methods. In other words,
if you apply the formulation that I've been using here today, you can sort of go into these other things and see how much of it is ego reduction, how much of it is actual pathways to avoiding going out of Satori, and so on. Or whether those concepts even exist in these other systems. If the concept of having a groovy trip does not exist in a given kind of thinking, it doesn't exist, and you have to face that. In the old encounter group format, this didn't exist. There was no way in the old encounter group format of getting yourself onto a high. All there was getting yourself off bummers into neutral.
On that point, the negative, I'm not quite clear where you stand. It seems that you have to have the negative as well as the positive. You've got to have the ecstasy, the agony before you can have the ecstasy. Like John of the Cross and Beethoven. They have to have the dark night of the soul before they have the ecstasy.
Well, if you're a trampoline-type personality, yes. You have to have the agony and the ecstasy. But once you can move through that, that's a transition phase. You can then move into a place where you can stay neutral and go up only. Now, by happenstance, you may be forced negative, but at least it's not an ego program that's bringing you down from within. There may be a disaster in which a brick falls off a building and knocks you out or something. You wake up in the hospital. Pardon?
The dark night of the soul isn't necessary then?
The dark night of the soul? I don't know whether it's necessary or not. Some of the modern kids don't seem to have it. But my generation, it's very common.
Since the various levels of consciousness are spelled out in yoga, which goes back some 5,000 years, would you comment on your feelings about the chakras and kundalini?
She asked that I comment on the chakras and kundalini. There was a historical note at the beginning of that. The chakras and kundalini are fine if you know what you're doing. But, for instance, read Kundalini by Gopi Krishna, and you'll find that there are kind of negative difficulties you can get into with this technique. And he illustrates them very well in his book. It's a first-hand account of what happened to him. There are some things that go on in this biological self-programming system known as Kundalini. But again, I would prefer to have some additional theoretical structures over and above the Kundalini as an isolated thing. I don't think the Kundalini approach can exist in a vacuum as a pure kind of thing anymore. We have to bring it in relation to all the others.
What psychotherapy can get you high? What are the implications of what you're saying for psychotherapeutic?
He asked, what are the implications of what I'm saying for psychotherapy? I thought I made that clear. Mental health, in my view, is an ability to navigate in these spaces. And if you don't have this ability, you need what used to be called psychotherapy, but with the view towards freeing you up so that you can navigate in these spaces. Psychotherapy is just another name for techniques for ego reduction, if you wish, in this formulation.
You spoke about the assumptions of a certain kind of encounter group that could only get you off a bummer and not get you high. It's precisely those assumptions and what current therapies seem to you more or less useful that I want to know about.
Well, the encounter group in the proper hands is useful in ego reduction, very much so. If you've got some ego bird dogs in the group, they will reduce your ego. But unless you know the formulation and they all agree that this is the formulation, you can get into people bringing their bummers and getting everybody else on a bummer. I mean, a lot of people have that great talent to do that. And that's where your leader should step in and make it positive, rather than somebody taking over and, you know, accusing you of things that you're not, that you don't have in you. If somebody says you're obviously afraid and you're hiding your fear, and you're not doing this, and you know damn well you're not doing this, you know, in an encounter group, this can be kind of embarrassing. You may just have to sit there centered and let the people attack you and refuse to come out. And be strong about it. And if you can do this, okay. I've seen people at Esalen encounter groups feeling very guilty because they didn't have anything, you know, to give in the way of negative things. Well, they just weren't negative. These were strong people. And they're beautifully centered and just stayed centered. So I encouraged them to stay there. Some of the encounter groups expect everybody to break down in one way or another. This is nonsense.
What do you believe, if you believe in it, what happens after physical death of the body?
really, I don't know. I haven't died yet. What happens after physical death? I can give you a theory about what happens. In this formulation, the essence just pulls out and doesn't come back to the vehicle, that's all.
What happens to the metaprogram?
Well, the so-called essential memories are taken out and kind of passed on somewhere else. The information that's been gained through that vehicle is not lost in this formulation.
Would reincarnation fit into this formulation?
Well, this is the formulation of reincarnation. It's carrying, as it were, you take out the essential memories out of the computer and put them over here somewhere else in another storage mechanism of some sort. Either human or non-human or, solid state, whatever.
To whom are those memories now available?
Other essences.
Did you say that there were concrete steps or concrete ways to get on the pathways to the various state places?
Yeah, there are at least 1,000. The trouble is that they all depend on one another, and they depend on your attitude and how much work you're willing to put in. In Chile, each of us, gave up our jobs, went down there, and spent all our time on it. Well, I was there working for 8 months, and the rest of the group are gone on for 10. This is, 7 days a week. You're not thinking or doing much else but the trip. Now, half the group could afford this, the other half couldn't, so there's a kind of a mutual support that has to go on here. It's rugged to do this, but if you're going to do the kinds of things that we were trying to do, as it were, then you should devote this much time to it. Now, if you have a job and you have to stay nailed down to a job, so you have less time to devote to it, but the same kinds of activities will probably pay off in the end. It depends on where you are, how strong the ego programs are, and so on. Each person is a special case. As I said at one point in Chile to somebody that asked, we're all in a big room. There are 1,000 doors out of it. All you have to do is be able to open one of those doors. And from that point on, you're in. You're in these spaces you can navigate. So Oscar was showing us 1,000 different ways of doing it. Number 501 would work for me, but not for the next guy. So it is a very complicated, at present, we do not know direct pathways. So there's this sort of a shotgun attempt to try everything. Well, it still works, He throws out methods that don't work, and he has still 1,000 methods. There are group processes, for example, which can get you into these states, as the Sufis and the dervishes have known for many years, hundreds of years. There are individual work, as the yoga has shown. And I don't want to get into too much of this because it's available. It's in the literature. If you read all the Sufi literature, especially the Book of the Dervishes, for example, you can learn some of the older terminologies, the older roots to these same spaces. I don't know of any modern, broad book that covers, catalogs all of these methods. And that's a lack in the present literature.
What do you mean by outside reality?
When did I use the terms? Okay. An outside reality in that sense is outside oneself and can be perceived and experienced by someone else so that you can get consensus, agreement, that, hey, look, over there, there's a mirror. And everybody looks over there, and there's the mirror. Okay? That's as far as you can go until you start experiments. And you start experiments on light reflection off the mirror and so on. And everybody can then agree, okay, these are the laws of the mirror. So the mirror is outside me. You don't have to come into my mind to see the mirror. You can see it directly. That's all I mean by outside. Now, in the Satoris, and in these special states, you can get consensus, but you have to have experienced, well-trained people to do it. And there's so few of those these days who have the language to transmit and the agreement. See, you have to have a vocabulary, you have to have a language that you can communicate what's happened, and the other guy has to understand your language, and he has to have had the experiences, so that you can line up the language and the experience and say, okay. Now, one of the things that a modern scientist would say is against all that is that you may be just programming one another into these spaces, creating them inside your own head, and this is a mutual programming procedure. Well, all I can say is that I have no way yet of separating off mutual programming except on a timing basis.
Having like a real heavy kind of experience and then trying to relate it to someone else. Like, why do you do that? Because your ego still needs to get over.
No, I think that one does that trying to find ways for other people to make it easier for them to attain the states or get into the states. No, I think if you're going to be a teacher, you have to know your way around in order to transmit it. If you're going to be a narcissistic, solipsistic yoga sitting in a cave, okay, that's your trip.
You consciously say, like, I'm going to go teach, it doesn't happen unconsciously. Cool.
I don't know. It happens to be one of my motivations. I don't know where that comes from.
Have you ever experienced a time when you felt it coming from something into, receiving?
Acting as an agent? Yeah, that's the way I feel most of the time when I'm teaching. Somehow it doesn't seem to be me that's doing all this. I'm sitting off over here watching me do this, watching this vehicle do it.
You made about 3 statements I wanted to connect. One was that certain people had no downers, no ego programs to overcome, and yet because of cultural factors, were very hesitant. They were talented in this direction, you said. You also spoke of your own sticking with this planet until certain experiences, your own personal experiences, and then you also spoke, I think, of negative 12 as institutionalized people. That institutionalized people might be 12 people who were misunderstood. All of this implies that certain humans have a faculty for the higher Satori's, whereas others don't. Is this so? Could you define what you mean by a talent for the Satori states?
Talent is just a situation in which you have no explanation for why the person is able to be in these places, and you're given that person and you haven't really investigated it. What you may find is that the people of talent have never been exposed to downer programs that have been embedded in their computer. They've just brought through from childhood by luck or by design of the parents or whatever it is. And they just have not absorbed this kind of programming. So have the talent.
But theoretically, isn't everybody talented?
Well, theoretically, everybody has the potential. And if you can dig away at these programs and get rid of them, sure. I expect to see this taking place in the next 10 years. It'll be very common, and we'll wonder what all the fuss was about.
John, some time ago, in another lecture, you spoke of meeting in an outer space or in a space. I think 2 entities, pairs, at that time, negative entities. And today you spoke of in a -6, I think, reference meeting a single negative. You used the word enemy. Would that enemy be the same thing?
I said entity. Enemy. No, entity.
This entity would be the same entity that you referred to in a previous bad trip in another lecture.
Well, it all depends on your interpretation. That was not a bad trip. The 2 guides that I came on in 6, when I was very close to death, I was in coma for many hours, and my body was a painful place to be, so I left it, as it were. So, and these 2 entities said, you know, your body's okay. You can go back. Your time hasn't come to be here, but you can come back here anytime you want to. Now, they didn't say those words, but they transmitted that information by whatever the information transmittal mechanism is on 6. It seems to be a direct read-in into the computer, as it were, without the use of words, by some sort of a coding mechanism that's much more basic than our verbal levels.
Are there positive entities on the counterpoint?
Positive and negative is what we put on them. There are entities, and there are neutral ones that we can make look evil or make look super good. When I was 7 years old, these two gods I clothed in the typical Catholic angel kind of thing. And they wrapped their wings around me and all that because I was a little guy and I was frightened. But when I was 21, they became just points in a well-lighted, loving space.
Projection of your ego, as you spoke of earlier today, and what would be this positive?
It could still be a projection. It could still be a program in my computer, creating as if. However, it doesn't have that feel. When you're there, you have this absolute certainty that this is a reality outside yourself and that you're not creating it. Now, this may be an illusion too. I don't know.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. Today's show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme song is by Nico Holland.